Hey guys, Ewan here. Just as a quick intro to my own video, a more detailed breakdown of the bass stems, and as an interlude in Michael's, I'm just going to explain a bit about the bass I used on the recording over My Blood by 21pilots. And afterwards, if you're watching on ijlaudio, I'll go through a more detailed breakdown of all of the stems that I ended up sending Michael. So first, let's check out the bass. So this is a sub Stingray model by Sterling, which is a sort of, I suppose, the Epiphone to Gibson and Squier to Fender series by Ernie Ball or Music Man. So you can see up the top here, it's the Sterling sub on the headstock. And you can look these up, they've actually changed them since, and they look pretty cool now. They just called them Stingrays, I think, since. But really nice bass. A couple of notes, I had to lower the pickup in the past. If you can see here, the pickup itself has been pushed down away from the strings, which does change the sound, but I tried to do as much looking into it as I could and make sure it's, you know, okay for purpose. But it was clipping on the preamp on the output, so it was the most easy solution for now before I might replace the pickup eventually and the preamp itself. But the preamp has a volume pot, so your main output, it's got a mid control, a tone control, and a bass tone control. So they're kind of clocked at 12 at 0, and you can take away bass and add it, or take away mid and add it here. And then that just went straight into the JFET DI on the Audient preamp here, and sounded really good on the way in. Hopefully you'll hear that in the more detailed breakdown or in Michael's video. And I just did my own version of some sort of distorted bass line for the purposes of sending it on, and gave all of the layers to Michael, which we'll go through in more detail here, but at least sent him a package with everything edited, ready to go to the timeline, to the tracks that he sent me to a click, and let him do what he wanted with it. So kind of approached it like a session player, I suppose, and that giving him all the options he needed. He could just go ahead with my DI signal if he wanted, or use all of my layers. And we'll go through it further, but you can see on the screen here that the main edit is comped together, and then I have it bounced out so that I could send it to Michael. And there's 4 other layers that form my main kind of distortion that I also sent to him. So if you're watching on ijlaudio, we'll go through it now. And if you're watching on In The Mix, you can jump over here and see it, or I'll send you back to Michael. And thanks very much for having me. So here we are in Pro Tools, and if you are watching on ijlaudio and you haven't gone over there, I would recommend, of course, either before or after, checking out Michael's video on In The Mix. And just to explain, this is part of his Sound Off series featuring the track My Blood by 21pilots, and we're going to be going through what I did to send Michael on some bass parts for the track. So if you haven't and you want to, of course, go check out the track itself, and you'll get a feel for what we were doing here. But I'll just give you a listen for the kind of the overall bass sound that I ended up sending Michael first, and then we're going to go through each of the stems and a bit of the recording process and stuff like that. So let's jump into it here. You'll be hearing, I hope, yeah, I'm just looking at the track. This is the comp that I sent Michael. This is the original edit. These are his drum stem and the vocal included stem, which was what I recorded to, but we'll just listen to the drums. And then these are all of the layers, these 4 tracks here that I sent him. And this is the kind of master bus for it, and this is the print of it as well. So let's just get a feel for the overall distorted sound. So you can hear there it's pretty full on. It's a bit more raw than the original track was, and that's kind of deliberate. I just wanted to go for my own kind of version of it, and knowing that I was going to refine it a bit, but it turned out I just sent Michael what I had, because I knew he was going to work on the DI signal anyway, and he just loved it in the first place. So I just made a small few changes to kind of bring it that bit closer to what's in the original track, but knowing it's going to go through a lot of processing anyway, as I said in the intro, approaching this like a session player, I just did a lot and gave them all they needed, them being Michael, or it would be the team, the mixer, the composer, the producer, everything. So basically the recording process was putting the Sterling sub you saw in the intro into the JFET DI in the Audient preamp, and that just sounds really good off the bat. The preamp does anyway. So I'll give you a listen to the bass soloed with no processing on it. This is just the DI, or at least the edit of the DI that I put together, and I'll go through that in a second. Are we coming out here? Sorry, no, we're not. I should have had an option enabled here, and now you'll hear it. So you can hear it's pretty punchy, it's pretty full on. I think the only settings I had adjusted on the bass was to take out a small bit of mid-range. As you saw in the intro, there's a bass and a mid control on it, and to add a small bit of bass. That was it. Very minor adjustments to just change the overall tone pretty drastically. If I hadn't done that, you'd hear a lot more honk in the mid-range, which is, you know, it's good on the bass. You need that. You need the cut to get through the track in the end. But it was just that bit too much. And then the low ends just felt a lot more present and kind of thick when you just give it even a couple of dB, as it were, I suppose. I don't know exactly, I should, what the preamps specs are, but if you were to turn from the kind of 0 point to the 12 o'clock bass dial up full, let's say, that gives you a pretty huge tone, if anything too much in most, you know, DI inputs or DI settings at least. Putting it into an amp would be very different, of course, but that would be another conversation altogether, where you're just using the DI for the moment and kind of doing it like a lot of you would be doing it. So let's have a look at the edit quickly. If I make this track larger, we can jump in and see things like small edits I've made of phrases. I try not to replace like notes or anything like that. That usually sounds quite unnatural. And the riff, as it happens, is quite broken up. So it was a really easy editing process. As a small aside, I suppose you can't really see it here, but I'll just go through it quickly, that everything here you see is crossfaded. If your DAW doesn't automatically do this, it's something to go through, because you'll get clipping when you're running between signals. Like if I'm even able to turn on my scrubbing here, and warning, if you're listening at a certain volume, turn it up right now and don't forget to turn it down afterwards. But you might even hear the tiniest bit of clipping if I'm to scrub over this crossfade, if I didn't hit a 0 point perfectly. There's something there. But when I turn my headphones up, I can hear as much of my own breathing. So that's a good crossfade, let's say. But if you had like a clipped signal somewhere or something, and you could see the broken waveform, you could literally scrub over it if that functionality is available in your DAW, and hear the clip so that you could edit it. But don't forget, if your DAW doesn't apply it automatically, to do crossfading and all that kind of thing when you're editing like this. So you'll hear that there's just certain phrases replaced across a combination of 2 takes out of... Sorry, my computer is lagging. Fun. But it's a combination of 2 takes across, I think, 13 or something. I think I usually get to 6 or 7, but for this, maybe, you know, I was overthinking it, and I somewhere through the takes I started to fluff a lot of sections for some unknown reason. But you know yourself, it's just overdoing it. That's definitely a tip for me, is to like warm up once or twice when you're going to record. Let the nerves fly out and go for the kind of 4 or 5 takes, knowing you can comp and edit things. Not that you're cheating, but if you get something wrong but the rest of the take is perfect, why, you know, negate having it? Like, if you want to go there, if you were on tape, you'd still do the same thing. You get the perfect take and do the hard work, the hard graft. The engineer would go in and cut the tape for it. So you're just doing the same thing here, although I'll show you it's extremely easy. So I'm just using Pro Tools to explain for those of you, because this kind of thing is really easy. You can see I just go to the playlists view here, can switch between waveform, which is just looking at the current edit I'm looking at, and here's all the playlists with all the takes. I can switch between those, and if I go to playlist view here, they're just all in front of me and I can edit between them. But let's find a section that I was kind of messing up in. I'm sure I'll hear something. So we will need to solo up this track again. And are we not hearing it? We're not. Sorry, I don't think I had it rigged. So it should be going to the master bus. Here we go. So this is like take 10, let's say. Yeah, you can hear there's a... which should have been... and that's even wrong. It should have been... and you can see it's replaced there even. So I obviously started getting it wrong pretty early, whatever it was. And I think I might have pulled that from take 11. You can tell by the colors. There you go. It was just a nice... I just hit the phrase well. So overall, I think it's like take 6 and 5 and 6. I think like this is take 5, the red, all of the red here. If I zoom out, you can kind of see it in a macro style. All of that red take there. I just liked the way I hit that break section. We'll have a listen to it in a second. And then the rest of this was 5, all of the kind of the gold you can see here, or yellow. And then you can see, of course, I've got the small edits in between. So I just do that, as I said, to get good phrasing the whole way through. And if the take is okay, I just repair it from there. It's a good way to approach it for yourself. So let's have a listen to the break section as well. And one last listen to the actual edit, which is what I call the comp. And this gets committed. So if I go back out into the waveform view, and you can see this is the, bass edit group version 3, because I did 2. Well, I did a first, a second, and a third version. And the .cm just means commit, which is this process here. If I right click and commit, it'll like literally bounce out the track, but it's all delay compensated as well. So if you've applied any processing or anything like that, it comes back out in the same time as it was before. So let's have a listen to just the bass comp of the break section, and then we'll jump over again to get a comparison of what the end distortion sound is, and then we'll start going through the stems themselves. So that's DI recording, which is how I heard it when I recorded it. Unfortunately, I don't have many fuzz or distortion pedals for bass or anything like that. So although you could set it up like that and you could split the signal and have a DI as well as going into the amp and monitor the mic signal from the amp, and it would all be great fun, I couldn't do that. And not only that, is it quite CPU costly to actually apply that processing. So unless I'm working with an artist or something like that, if it's for my own purposes, I just play as best I can, kind of knowing what it's going to sound like almost. Might even test like I did with Guitar Rig. I just stuck like the Screamer or whatever, one of the free distortions on just to hear, and I kind of knew, okay, yeah, the fingers are going to be really there, so the performance needs to be tight in that sense. Like you can hear like in the edits, like I'm trying to make sure that even though it's not all exactly to the grid, that the clicking of the fingers and the rhythm is always there. That's why things like this blue and green section are here. So if you listen again, I think it's the bum bum boom boom ba-doom. Those sections, excuse the singing, is to replace the rhythm there, so that the phrasing along with the drums was really tight. So if I solo it again and we have a listen, and you watch for these blue and green waveforms coming up over here. You know, and they're not even perfect themselves. It's just good ones to edit in over the take that was there. And you can see that's actually happened every time, really. I liked all of the rest of this take, but I just put in different rhythms, different parts of that section. Once I heard it, the take over a couple of times, you realize that the feel was just a little off. And then once you replace one, you kind of get a feel for replacing them all. So this is the final comp. All of it's cross-faded from start to finish, so there's no clipping or anything. You can see I even do a safety one then on the commit version of it. And then it's this commit that gets easily processed into all these tracks. And the reason I do that is because if we change this comp up here, it's just the same process. I delete this version 3, I'll make a version 4, and I'll just replace that clip down here every time into the well, excuse me, it wouldn't even be that. No, I'm remembering exactly how I did it now, because this is a couple of days ago, playing with the temporal space. What it would actually be is that I ran the entire set here in the inactive tracks, the actual process tracks we're going to look at, and then I committed those themselves, because again, when they're committed, it will remember all the automation, it will apply all the processing, and it will all be delay compensated. So these 4 tracks here are actually the committed versions of these. So then I would just replace the clip here. I would just literally drag it down, and you can see then that all these waveforms are different looking. These are the actual final versions I sent to Michael, so that in his DAW, hopefully he literally opened it up and probably maybe turned some of these up or down in the opposite direction to what I had them, but they were all in the same balance that I originally created them. So he could just put one fader on the end of these tracks, and it would actually just become the stem that I created, as well as him having control over it. And of course I sent him the final one as well. You can see here the bass wet is actually the committed version of this master track here. So all of this would be dry prior to that, of course. The wet meaning like all effects applied, because that's just, if for yourself, it's an easy way to do things if you're committing effects all the time. Wet versus dry is a really handy terminology, just in case you're not using it all the time. If you see it in your folders all the time, it becomes really familiar. So let's make all of our commits inactive so that we're not taking up CPU by trying to compensate for them. And let's activate our main layers. Sorry if this takes a second, because there's a fair bit of processing. And there we go. Relatively painless, I hope. Phew, I thought we were going to crash mid-video. That would be fun. So you can see I have them all grouped here as well, and just that they're commits, these have the group settings applied. But of course, because they're inactive now, nothing is going to be going on with them. But what are we looking for authorization for in the middle of a video? I am sure that is just my iLock being in this USB adapter. Had to happen, middle of a video. Cancel. There we go. It'll still work. I've seen that before. It's for one of the plugins I'm not even using. Classic. So Let's have a listen again. So this is the 4 layers going through this master bus here. The ozone EQ is applied, and then of course Michael would have got the final version as well as the 4 committed versions here. So the original DI sound gets made for me in my head, and this is just the way I approached it, into kind of 4 main layers. There's the kind of main body of the distortion is what I call the mid valve, which is this track here, if I highlight it. And then the like top end of the distortion, and really what would sound like pure distortion to most people, this is more of a fuzz, would be this track here. The kind of the bottom or the girth of the sound is made by, I usually use a kind of a compressed lo-fi. That's something you'll all know from Warren Hewart as well. And I compress it heavily, and there'll be a bit of EQ usually to clean it up. And then my kind of punch layer is always usually the original DI itself, and I'll kind of roll that off to not run into the very low lows of the first layer here, but I'll retain as much mid-end and as much of the kind of character of a bass guitar as I can. For this particular exercise, that's also not necessarily how I approached it straight up, because we actually don't want it to sound too much like a DI bass guitar as we're making a distorted one. But if I was making just what I, would normally approach as a cool bass sound for whatever track I'm doing, this would be how I would do it with these 2 layers. So we'll have a listen to them all one after the other. And all together again. So you can hear that overall the 4 layers ends up forming a pretty thick, full sound that especially a mixer, a pro one, could go off and do a lot with, or just choose to take the original from that master bus over here. So we'll go through quickly what's being applied. On the bottom layer, I just have the lo-fi here, which the settings you could take and play with, or just match with another similar distortion plugin of your choice. I chose the adaptive quantization setting, which I'm not really sure exactly what it does, just because it sounded better on the spot and usually does for this kind of bass setting. So that's then compressed with the iZotope Vintage compressor, which I've had for a while, luckily. Really nice package from the Ozone stuff. And you can take those settings and play with them in most compressors or vintage emulations you have or anything like that. The one thing here is the detection filter, that it is rolled off a bit, like because the settings there tend to make the compressor react really hard to the very bottom end of the bass, which isn't always necessary, because a lot of the character and the tone that we're trying to hit with the compressor is more in the upper range, the kind of the 80 hertz and plus. So there can be kind of mud down here that I tend to roll it up so that we're easing the reaction of the compressor as we get down into the real bottom end of the bass. So then I have the EQ 1 band here rolling off 90 hertz really simply, just to make sure again that we're cleaning up any mud before we go anywhere, and just any rumble that we really don't need against our kick drum and things like that. On the mid layer then, which is kind of the DI bass, if you ever listen to it again, probably the layer that sounds most like a bass. I just decided to have kind of fun with it and go really raw and use the MV2 to compress it, get it really full and thick and present and kind of in your face straight off the bat. Then I'm notching out some 300 hertz that I heard, if you want to hear that bypassed and unbypassed. Just makes it a little sweeter to fit into everything else, because there's already going to be a lot of mid-range going on with all the distortion we had. So then there's some extra EQ, and this is rolling off the top end to make it sound literally less like an actual bass, so that, as I said, it fits into this kind of distortion layering that we're doing. You can hear that the top end is really making it sound much more like a bass guitar than kind of a layer inside that distortion that we're making. So then we also have the vintage limiter from iZotope in the Ozone package, and I think this is already old. I think they've changed now in the Ozone 8, which I'll have to check out at some point, but for now I spent money on these and I would like to use them for a time longer if I can. You can see that the ceiling is set so that we're not just going crazy up to the top of our output potential, and the threshold set to where I thought it was sounding cool. So let's have a listen with it bypassed. So just kind of making it full, present, just always on sort of setting. And you can see that we're making up for 6 dB of gain. Fun. So let's have a listen to the kind of the mid valve filter, I call it, which is more because of the audio thing, Valve Exciter, which is a really fun plugin. I think it's not too expensive, and this was given out under the plugin collective from Focusrite at one stage. So if you don't own any products, I think there's other kind of products included, but if you own any products from Focusrite, you can sign up to that and get other things in the future, I'm sure. But I think the producer of Audio Thing is from Ireland as well, so that's a shout out, and it's a really good plugin. I also have Filter Jam, I think it's called, and amazing stuff, just like simple and cool, fun to use. The one thing I would like is an output control on this plugin, because as soon as you apply it and get the valve working, or what's inside under the hood at least, you will definitely need makeup gain and you know, to take off gain, take away gain, because it's fun, but of course it adds volume as a result. So let's have a listen to this distortion layer. It's kind of our mid-range, I would call it, honky fuzzy presence of the bass. So you can hear that kind of creates like it floats beneath the entire signal. Let me clean up here. But it adds a character. It's definitely adding some sort of life to the overall signal. And all we've done here is clean up the bottom and the top. No need really, because I'm using it to clean or to create fuzz and warmth in the mid range and a real presence. So I didn't need to sweep it too much. And also, of course, we're going to be kind of making up for that in layering it. So I didn't want to go too far, EQing the hilt out of everything. So here's the top distortion layer. And that's formed by, first of all, just doing a similar thing with lo-fi, just a bit more refined, and a different one to the original bottom layer. And then I've applied isotope trash. So this is quite a large part of the sound we got, for good reason. And it's a really good plugin if you do get the chance to check it out. So I've got a filter applied here. You can pause and look at if you want. I'll put the frequencies through it so you kind of see what's going on. And that's, of course, first. That's first in the signal path. We've then got trash going on after it, which is the actual kind of distortion modules that are available to you in the trash plugin. And I started cycling through, but noted straight away the blues driver setting and went straight back and played with that and just knew this was what I wanted to use. As soon as I went full on with the pre, I know that, of course, under the hood, things should be all good because the development is definitely on point, and applying loads of pre-gain just sounded great, as it probably would on blues driver or amp inputs or etc. And you'll hear that the drive here is a really important setting if I play with this, and it's actually pretty much exactly around the 4.1 that it gets the particular tone that we have on this distortion. If I go too far, you'll hear that it's actually kind of not pleasant. It's not what we're looking for. It kind of starts to sound like a metal zone. If you don't know that, Google it. Well, I shouldn't say metal zone now that I hear it again, but certainly not exactly what we're going for. Fun and all, but just that bit too far. You'll hear that there's a tone around this kind of 4 range on the drive setting, and I presume that this is changing somehow the input on the wave, or well, I don't really know exactly what it's doing, but somehow emulating the drive setting that would be in distorting transistors and etc. on a real pedal. And then after that, we're just refiltering again to gain some character. Clean it up. And a little bit of compression that used to be applied quite heavily, but actually just in the process of sound design, and somehow slipping my mind, wasn't hitting the signal so hard in the end and just kind of got left behind. So, but it wasn't really necessary. You'll see how much of a sausage the signal already is from being so distorted. So after that then, just using a virtual mix rack from Slate Digital, and I'm applying some shimmer setting and thickness to get some bottom and top life basically in the signal, and then you can see I'm making up for the gain here on the trimmer section of that. And I just have the free stuff with this, which is the Monster, Revival and the trimmer plugin, but it's great. You should check it out. So before, after. And you can hear it's doing quite a lot to just give the last bit of life to the signal, that kind of overall sheen. And lastly on that then, I'm just cleaning up bottom end again, removing up to 150-ish hertz there, to just kind of get out of the way of the rest of what we're doing with all of this. And of course, I'm already filtering quite a lot in trash, so it's just more of a safety. And I know that, phase-wise, this can get kind of, weird and stuff, but of course I'm checking that the whole way through with the phase buttons on the EQ, and you can see the phase is actually flipped here, which is the tip, because of trash itself. You can hear we've got a very different signal, different sounding signal, although it's got more low end almost, like it sounds like it's more in phase. It's not the original signal we're looking for, because experience tells me as well that Trash tends to kind of not even flip phase necessarily, but just move it out. You know yourself, like if you go down the rabbit hole of any phase videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. I won't get into it too deeply here, but basically that the waveforms won't necessarily match each other even if you flip the phase anymore. So flipping the phase is a great test, and you'll realize that you can actually get two completely different results from doing so. So if we listen to the whole signal again, and we'll flip the phase, and this is on our top distortion layer with trash applied, as I was just saying. You can hear that this mid-range character we're looking for, and a lot of kind of bottom end weirdness going on, which, like, I suppose they're really just different sounds that you could use, completely change with just the phase relationship between all of these signals. And that's of course because the phase is different on all four of them, so it's something to watch when you're layering. And then lastly, we just have the ozone EQ applied, and of course I'm cleaning up a lot of bottom end then on this because I don't want to overdo that. I prefer having the energy out of the original signals and cleaning that up because it just sounds better if you don't have the character in the original signal. I find, again, from layering things and doing way too much EQing and stuff, that you can just do a lot better work with one move on like the master of your sound design or whatever. So let's hear the kind of master bus of the distortion with and without the EQ. And you'll hear, if we blend them, just in terms of how I was thinking while I was sending it to Michael, that most of the EQs, especially the roll-offs here, and here, make quite a difference. And to the last work on the bottom end, which is like a boost at 200 hertz and rolling off quite sharply at 50 hertz on the master. If you listen to all of those changing over the course of the riff, you'll hear how it just blends to the drums way better than if there's been a lot of, like, you know, useless stuff down there. So let's try it again and just listen to the difference once we move up through the EQs. So there's a detailed look at the sound design on what I sent Michael. I don't even know at this stage yet, again playing with the temporal space, whether or not he has used my final version or if he has gone through sound design on his own. But I presume he's going to use FL. And just as a quick aside to all of this, you can definitely apply this in any DAW you're using. Like if you look at the valve exciter, you can find an equivalent, like emulations and etc. All of the compression, same thing. In fact, some of it you can just emulate with tape or something like that. Just do dirty jobs of it. Again, use a tape emulation to just do a rough form of distortion, and it's just more fun and kind of sounds better in the long run if you're just careful with what you're doing. Like for this sound, for the top distortion, my recommendation would be find a saturator for afterwards and a wave shaper in FL or in Ableton or Logic or whatever DAW you're using, that would emulate the top distortion layer. quite well, or it would be a good start anyway, and just start drawing and getting crazy on the wave shaper and get close to that, because that's really all the Trash is doing there, emulating the blues driver. So as a last point then, all of these get, as I said here in Pro Tools, committed. For you, this might be printing, but just make sure that that happens with 0 latency. So if I zoom in on the waveforms here, you'll see that they're all exactly the same. Now they're in, you know, they start at the same place, let's say, that in terms of time, they are locked to the same grid, so to speak. So that, like, even though the waveforms look different here, these are the like totally manipulated versions, like the distortion layer, it, like, you know, literally has a different looking waveform, but you can see that they're all in time with the original DI signal, which is fed into all of the layers here. And once I right click and commit all of these 4 layers, let's say, these 4 are then ready to be sent off to whoever is mixing or producing the track. And I also then committed the master bus separately so that the same process happens and we have the original entire combination of 4 layers put together and ready for them if they just want to use that. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you want to nerd out on Michael's video, if you haven't already, you should go over there and check out the rest of the sound design on My Blood by 21pilots. Check out the track course, it's a really cool track. And I suppose I'll give you one last listen of what I sent to Michael to close us out, and I suppose I will see you in the next one.